Well, I don't know. We've got some great titles of things that Mr. Davis
She was
presented.
the voice that demanded respect, and got it. A gospel prodigy, a soul queen, and a cultural icon who shaped music, challenged power, and kept her battles private. But behind the soaring vocals and unforgettable hits was a life filled with complexity, contradictions, and quiet control. How did Aretha Franklin rise to such legendary heights? And why did she fight so hard to protect her story?
The biggest screw up in 9 years happens downstairs.
What was it? I had cake. The hotel sent me a beautiful cake up and everything. Indian.
Picture Detroit in 1998. The city's iconic opera house is filled to the brim. Velvet seats hold music legends, producers, politicians, and fans who've come together to honor one woman, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. The air inside buzzes with celebration, but just behind the curtain, the mood is anything but festive. Backstage, Aretha is seated calmly in her dressing room, poised, elegant, and silent, but anyone who knows her can sense the storm behind her stillness. She's not warming up her voice, she's not rehearsing, she's just sitting, visibly unimpressed. The issue, a name on the evening's program, a performer she hadn't approved. Someone she didn't want on the same bill. She turns to her assistant and, with deliberate calm, delivers a warning. If he sings tonight, I walk. The message spreads quickly, event organizers scramble, phones are picked up, orders are barked, names are moved around. It's not hysteria, it's respect. Aretha Franklin didn't need to raise her voice to change the course of an event. A look, a pause, a sentence was enough. She had that kind of authority, and she earned it. For decades, Aretha stayed silent about many of the tensions she experienced in the industry. She rarely commented publicly on drama, and when she did, her words were carefully chosen. But near the end of her life, something changed. She began speaking more candidly, naming names, pointing to moments that hurt her, and revisiting old slights that had never really faded. These weren't just stories of artistic differences, they were personal accounts of betrayal, competition, and disrespect. One of the most public examples came in 2008. It was the Grammy Awards, and Beyoncé was on stage to introduce another icon, Tina Turner. With a glowing smile and confident delivery, she called Turner the Queen. The audience applauded. After all, Turner was a music legend in her own right. But the moment didn't sit well with Aretha. Aretha Franklin had been known as the Queen of Soul since the 1960s. The title wasn't something she claimed lightly. It was given to her through decades of work, performances that spanned gospel, R&B, and soul, civil rights activism, and a voice that was both unmistakable and untouchable. The word Queen wasn't a casual nickname. It represented a legacy. So when Aretha heard Beyoncé's introduction, she didn't brush it off. Within hours, she issued a rare public statement. Without directly naming Beyoncé, Aretha described the comment as a cheap shot and a lapse in respect. For a woman who had spent most of her life avoiding public disputes, the statement was sharp and deliberate. To some, it seemed like overreaction, maybe just diva behavior. But to those close to Aretha, it was more than pride. It was about how history is remembered, about how quickly decades of struggle can be overlooked when the spotlight moves. Aretha had spent her life breaking barriers, especially for Black women in the music industry. She made space where there was none, often under pressure, often alone. So when a younger artist, no matter how talented, seemed to forget that legacy or skip past it, it hit differently. From that moment on, Aretha kept her distance. She didn't attend events where Beyoncé was performing. She declined joint appearances. She reportedly avoided photo opportunities that would place them side by side. And while she never launched a personal attack, her private thoughts weren't always kind. Close friends recall Aretha referring to Beyoncé as a gifted girl who forgot to curtsy. It's important to put this into perspective. This wasn't just about a title or a word spoken during an awards show. Aretha had seen the music industry evolve over 5 decades. She had seen how quickly it could forget its pioneers, and she understood the difference between homage and erasure. While Beyoncé's words were likely meant as a tribute, they also unintentionally touched a nerve, one that was tied to the long and often painful history of Black women being overlooked or replaced in the public imagination. Aretha's response was about preserving that history, about making sure that younger generations didn't forget who laid the foundation. And maybe, just maybe, it was also a quiet warning to the industry. Don't rewrite the narrative without consulting the ones who wrote the first chapters. Over the years, Aretha had built a reputation for setting boundaries, professionally, musically, and personally. If someone crossed the line, she didn't always confront them publicly, but she never forgot. Her silence was strategic. It gave her power. But near the end of her life, that strategy shifted. In interviews and private conversations, she began to reflect more openly. Friends and biographers noticed a pattern. The Queen of Soul was finally telling her version of the story. Her reflections weren't just about one incident. They revealed something deeper about the way she viewed her career and the music world as a whole. She wasn't looking for constant praise, but she did demand respect. And when she felt it was missing, she responded in the most Aretha way possible, with elegance, with strength, and with unmistakable clarity. The 2008 Grammy moment marked the beginning of what would be a series of quiet reckonings in Aretha's final decade. It opened a window into how she had internalized certain slights over the years. Not out of bitterness, but because those moments mattered. They represented shifts in power, shifts in narrative, and shifts in how legacy is honored or overlooked. Even as she aged, Aretha maintained her status not just through her music, but through her presence. She rarely lashed out, never pleaded for relevance, and never compromised her values. And when she did choose to speak, her words carried weight precisely because she had used them so sparingly for so long. There's a lesson in that. In an industry often driven by hype, trends, and constant reinvention, Aretha represented something rare: consistency. She stood firm in who she was and what she believed in, even when it cost her opportunities or brought criticism. And perhaps that's why her later revelations caught people off guard. The quiet storm had finally spoken. Part of what made Aretha's late-kept reflections so compelling was their honesty. She wasn't trying to stir up controversy. She was setting the record straight, making sure that future generations understood the full picture, not just the polished tributes or the public achievements, but the struggles, the disappointments, and the unspoken truths that shaped her journey. Aretha Franklin's story isn't just about a feud with a younger singer. It's about what happens when legends age in a world that's always looking for the next big thing. It's about the tension between reverence and relevance. And most of all, it's about the quiet power of a woman who chose her moments and her words very carefully. As the Queen of Soul stepped into her final chapter, she made one thing clear. Titles can be shared, stages can be crowded, but legacy? That's something you earn. And once you've earned it, you have every right to protect it. Which name surprised you the most? And do you think Aretha was justified in her response? Or was this just part of the cost of being a legend in a changing world? Let us know below, because the conversation doesn't end with the music. Sometimes it starts with what's left unsaid. In the mid-1970s, Aretha Franklin prepared for what was billed as a historic television duet with Ray Charles, a meeting of two pillars of soul music. The pairing was ambitious and heartfelt, two legends joining their voices in a rare, live performance. Rehearsals reflected mutual respect and anticipation. They laughed together, shared stories, and found easy harmony. Many expected their voices to blend seamlessly, their years of experience culminating in a moment for the ages. But when the cameras began rolling, the chemistry shifted. Ray, known for his improvisational flair, took liberties that night. He departed from the agreed structure, adding unexpected bridges and rhythmic flourishes. What had been smooth on stage turned jagged in the moment. Aretha, a consummate professional, tried to adapt on the fly, but the balance was lost. Viewers saw spontaneity. Aretha felt something else: orchestration at her expense. Behind the scenes, Ray is reported to have chuckled with producers and remarked, "She's great, but not quick on her feet." The comment, though casual, stung. For Aretha, built on control, precision, and respect, this was no offhand compliment. It was a public statement that she lacked agility. It felt like betrayal. Aretha chose never to perform with Ray Charles again. Not on television, on tour, or even in private. To her inner circle, the incident was deeply personal. She felt Ray had taken her moment and used it for his own gain. His spontaneity in her eyes crossed the line from creative expression to callous dismissal. What remained was silence, a separation between two artists who once shared harmony. The next confrontation would come not with a peer, but with a collaborator, Luther Vandross. In 1982, Aretha teamed up with Luther, then a rising star and rising producer, to create the hit Jump to It. The single soared to #1 on the R&B charts, proving a fruitful creative partnership. But on their second project, recording the album Get It Right in 1983, a clash emerged. According to Aretha's autobiography and later interviews, what began as respectful collaboration turned tense when Luther stepped too far. Aretha recalled in her memoir that during one session, Luther began dictating how she should sing, notes, phrasing, each nuance. She confronted him. If he wanted to tell the artist how to sing, why didn't he sing it himself? His job was to produce and advise, definitely not say, "Sing it like this." Heated words followed. Aretha grabbed her coat and left the studio, the session ending in upheaval. The tension was not a simple dispute. It revealed a deeper fault line. Aretha believed her artistry stemmed from instinct and lived experience, not instruction or correction. Luther, meanwhile, carried confidence in his arrangements, used to shaping voices through meticulous production. The result was not just a disagreement, it was an ideological rift. Yet the story didn't end in acrimony. Aretha made clear she held respect for Luther, even while scorching him. Later, she said of him, "We really do like each other. We have a lot of mutual respect. I guess you could call it Aries butting heads, because he's an Aries too." She even confessed to friends that he was the kind of person who would listen to her records late at night, but she would never be found doing the same. Industry insiders confirmed their connection deepened over time. Despite the fiery argument during Get It Right, Aretha and Luther eventually smoothed things over. Clive Davis and friends negotiated peace. The song and album were completed. They went on to work together indirectly, producing duets and managing each other's careers at times. Though they never forgot that showdown in the studio, they learned to coexist and even collaborate again later in their lives. As powerful as the petty feud with Vandross was, it was dwarfed by what came next. Rock legend Keith Richards, whose remarks in a 2007 Rolling Stone interview stirred a very different kind of storm. Discussing the trajectory of soul music, Richards said, "Soul died with Otis Redding. Aretha's still around, but it's not the same." For Richards, a casual conversational line. For Aretha, a dismissal of her legacy and influence. Richards' words were widely reported. Some saw them as the musings of an aging rocker preferring a nostalgic era, but to Aretha Franklin, they cut deep. They suggested that her contribution somehow paled in comparison to a vanished era. She responded with an elegant and pointed remark on the radio. Some people confuse loud guitars with depth, bless his heart. It was a gentle, yet unmistakably sharp retort. A reminder that depth comes in many forms. As news circulated, Aretha's inner circle says she quietly distanced herself from Richards and the Rolling Stones universe. She declined joint honors, stepped away from events where Richards would appear, and effectively erased that association from her world, letting her legacy be defined by her own work and her own power, not overshadowed by a guitarist's dismissal. This second part of her story, spanning Ray Charles's Risky Detour, Luther Vandross's Production Crosswords, and Keith Richards's Minimization, reveals how much respect and reputation mattered to Aretha. Not fame, not fortune, but recognition of her craft and her mark on history. Aretha Franklin was never one to beg for validation. She didn't speak out often, but when she did, it wasn't to seek vengeance, it was to assert truth, to say what had gone unspoken. Each confrontation wasn't just about one moment of drama. It was a protest against being sidelined, against having her voice diminished, against seeing her story rewritten without her. In this part of her life, Aretha's silence spoke volumes, and when that silence ended, it carried the weight of a life spent shaping music, culture, and change. Next, we will explore her most personal reckonings, from fellow divas to Detroit's own icons, and understand how she held her ground in the face of shifting legacies and forgotten pioneers. How do you view these moments? Were they justified figures defending her legacy, or the price of staying true to artistic integrity in a world that often forgets its giants? Let us know in the comments below, because uncovering the real stories behind the music is how we keep their voices alive. In April 2017, a surprising letter arrived via fax from Aretha Franklin's camp to the Associated Press. It was a rare public statement, 5 years in the making, directed at fellow soul icon Dionne Warwick. According to Warwick's remarks at Whitney Houston's funeral in 2012, she suggested that Aretha was both present and introduced as Houston's godmother. Ree's not here, but she is here. She is her godmother, but Aretha had not attended the ceremony. Swelling in her feet and a later performance obligation at Radio City Music Hall prevented her from being there. Aretha's fax labeled Warwick's comments blatantly lied to me, fully well knowing what she was doing. It was a standout accusation of libel, hardly the tone one would expect from the Queen of Soul. 5 years had passed before Aretha chose to break her silence, and when she did, she didn't mince her words. The timing was as deliberate as the words were measured. By then, Aretha had stepped back from the spotlight, picking her moments judiciously. She explained that she chose silence earlier because there was already so much being said at Whitney's funeral, from the drugs, the family drama, to Bobby Brown, that she didn't want to add to the noise. But as interviews and appearances dwindled, it seemed the unresolved comment from Dionne had evolved into something deeper than a simple misstep. The public first heard Aretha's response when the fax was followed by a phone interview with the AP. She described Warwick's claim as damaging and insisted it crossed the line from being careless to crossing into defamation. A week later, at a Tribeca Film Festival event honoring Clive Davis, the tension surfaced again. Warwick reportedly approached Aretha backstage and attempted to hug her. Aretha reportedly said, "Oh, hell no, you couldn't be serious," and refused the gesture. That exchange was more than a snub, it was a statement. With those words, Aretha communicated that the wound was still fresh and that reconciliation would require more than a hug. For many fans, the public dispute was perplexing. Were these old tensions, simmering for decades, finally boiling over? In Warwick's corner, there was largely silence. Her representative stated that she will not dignify a response to the statement made by Aretha Franklin. No apology, no explanation, just quiet. To outsiders, it looked like diva behavior. But, digging deeper, there's more to the story. Aretha and Dionne's feud wasn't just about a funeral misstatement. It echoed a long and complicated rivalry. In the 1960s, Aretha covered Warwick's hits like Walk On By and I Say a Little Prayer. While covering hit songs is common, It meant Aretha was stepping into her rival's territory. She even enlisted Dion's aunt Cissy Houston as a backing singer on I Say a Little Prayer. Burt Bacharach, who co-wrote the original with Hal David, later said Aretha's version was much better. That competitive history set the stage for enduring tension. By the late 1970s and into the 80s, both singers found themselves under Clive Davis's Arista Records. Another layer of complexity. There were whispers of label politics and contrasting artistic paths. Aretha's relationship with Davis was close. Dion's was valuable, but not the same. As Whitney Houston emerged under Davis, connections deepened. Whitney was Dion's cousin, stirring further tension, all of which makes Warwick's funeral remarks seem part of a long, unfinished conversation. Aretha's final public word on Warwick's comments, about libel, not apology, makes sense when seen through that lens. It wasn't just about one statement, it was about a history of rivalry, competition, and unresolved respect. Clearly at the other end of the spectrum, another name stands out for a different reason. Eminem. He wasn't involved in a public spat with Aretha, but rather in an omission. His Detroit-born Marshall Mathers hailed as the voice of a new generation of Detroit talent. When he emerged in the late 1990s and early 2000s, he thanked rock icons and hip-hop legends, name-checked his influences and Detroit's proud musical history, but he never mentioned Aretha Franklin. It's hard to know whether it was intentional. In songs that celebrate Detroit, its grit and its musical heritage, Aretha's absence is noted by those who expect a hometown nod. Private accounts suggest Aretha took note. At a small dinner, someone reportedly asked her opinion on Eminem's rise. She shook her head and said, "He knows who I am. He just chose not to care." The words cut quietly but sharply. Later, in interviews, she referred to Eminem's music as noise, one word loaded with meaning, not enemy, not competition, but dismissive. It wasn't a call-out, it was a freezing of distance. Aretha didn't need to launch a feud, she just withdrew her warmth. To understand that silence, look to her career path. Aretha emerged amid gospel, soul, and civil rights. Her voice carried spiritual depth and social relevance. Eminem surfaced through angry rhymes and street tales. Both were unmistakably Detroit, but neither easily lived in the other's world. For Eminem to ignore Aretha, and for Aretha to later live him noise, was a clash of eras as much as egos. Part of Aretha's legacy is that she extended grace where she could, but when she felt sidelined, she pulled back. Her choice not to comment publicly on Eminem's omission allowed her reputation to speak. It signaled disapproval without drama, and that's the style she always preferred. Through these encounters with Dion and Eminem, Aretha set a boundary. She demanded accuracy, acknowledgement, and respect. In both cases, she didn't turn to sharp public confrontation. Instead, she responded in her own voice, measured, firm, final. Understanding these stories reveals something essential about Aretha Franklin. She wasn't ruthless, but she knew her worth. She wasn't petty, but she was protective. She wasn't afraid to walk away from someone overlooked or someone who misstated her values. Whether it was ignoring a modern star or calling out a supposed friend, she used silence and scarcity to communicate just as sharply as any words might have done. One of the more unexpected moments in these later years came in the form of a rumor involving Billy Joel. The story began after a series of concerts where Joel would often bring out surprise guest performers. At one show in 2014 at Madison Square Garden, Joel welcomed Aretha Franklin to the stage, and the two performed together to a thrilled audience. It was a moment of joy and reverence. Yet later, reports emerged that Aretha had been less than pleased with how she was introduced. According to accounts, she felt that the presentation lacked the proper build-up and gravitas. She had entered a room where she believed the crowd wasn't properly prepared for her appearance, which to her meant that the applause hadn't matched her stature. While some may see this as diva behavior, those who worked closely with Aretha understood that moments like these were not about ego. They were about control, legacy, and ensuring that the reverence she had spent decades earning wasn't taken for granted. Aretha's demand for proper recognition was rooted in her history. From the early days of performing in church to standing toe-to-toe with white male executives in the record industry, she had learned that if she didn't advocate for herself, no one else would. By the time she was in her 70s, she didn't feel the need to be modest or deferential about her place in music history. She wasn't just a participant in soul and gospel music. She was a defining figure. Any moment that seemed to understate that was to her a moment that needed correcting. At the same time, Aretha wasn't above showing support to younger artists. She famously covered Adele's Rolling in the Deep in 2014, putting her own gospel-infused spin on the British singer's massive hit. The performance was viewed by many as a stamp of approval, but even then she made it her own, seamlessly blending it with Ain't No Mountain High Enough. She wasn't just paying tribute, she was reminding everyone of her musical authority. Her performances in her later years were often intimate, but no less powerful. One of the most memorable came at the 2015 Kennedy Center Honors, where she performed You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman in tribute to Carole King. Wearing a floor-length fur coat and playing the piano herself, she brought the audience to its feet. President Barack Obama was seen wiping away tears. It was a reminder of just how deep her emotional reach extended, even after decades in the spotlight. Still, those close to her knew she was not well. Her weight had fluctuated and she had begun cancelling shows, sometimes at the last minute. In public, Aretha often insisted that she was simply tired or that doctors had advised her to rest. But behind the scenes, she was battling pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis that would not become widely known until near the end of her life. She remained intensely private about her health, often brushing off questions with vague answers or humor. That need for privacy was something she'd always upheld. Even in her prime, Aretha kept much of her personal life out of public view. In 2018, she made what would become her final performance, singing at an event for the Elton John AIDS Foundation. Frail but still commanding, she delivered what many saw as a farewell. The video of that performance shows her thinner, visibly tired, but still possessing that unmistakable voice. In retrospect, it was her parting gift, a last show of strength before quietly retreating. As her health declined further, stories began circulating that she had not left a will. For someone who had always been known for her meticulous control, this surprised many. After her death in August 2018, it was initially believed that she had passed intestate, without any formal plan for her vast estate. But months later, handwritten wills were discovered in her home. One was even found tucked under a couch cushion. These documents became the subject of legal battles among her 4 sons, as courts worked to determine which version of her wishes would be honored. To some, the fact that Aretha had left behind such an informal estate plan was confusing. How could someone who had been so careful about her music, her performances, and her finances be so disorganized about her legacy? But others pointed out that this was very much in line with her intensely private nature. She didn't want outsiders controlling her story. She didn't want lawyers, managers, or record labels deciding how she would be remembered. In her mind, even a handwritten will was better than placing her legacy in someone else's hands. One of the biggest concerns at the time of her passing was how her estate would handle her unreleased material. Like many artists of her generation, Aretha had recorded far more than she released. Some recordings were live performances, others were studio sessions that had never seen the light of day. Fans and music historians hoped that her estate would honor her wishes and handle her legacy with the same care she had during her life. In 2021, a court ruled that a handwritten document from 2014, found in a spiral notebook, was to be considered her valid will. That decision finally gave her sons and estate managers a clear roadmap. Yet the story didn't end there. Ongoing questions about the management of her intellectual property The control of her image and the potential for posthumous releases kept her name in headlines long after her death. Meanwhile, Aretha's influence remained visible across generations. Artists like Beyoncé, Jennifer Hudson, Alicia Keys, and Fantasia all credited her as an inspiration. Hudson, in particular, was handpicked by Aretha herself to portray her in the 2021 biopic Respect. Aretha had taken years to approve the project, turning down multiple scripts and actresses before finally giving her blessing. That insistence on control once again reflected her desire to shape the narrative, even from beyond the grave. When the film was released, it was met with mixed critical reviews, but almost universal praise for Hudson's performance. For fans of Aretha, it offered a window into her struggles, her strength, and her music. But more than that, it captured the essence of her defiance. Throughout her life, Aretha never allowed herself to be defined by others, not by her label, not by the press, and not even by other artists. She defined herself. And that, perhaps, is her greatest legacy. Her funeral, held in Detroit's Greater Grace Temple, was a sprawling, star-studded event. It lasted more than 8 hours and included performances from Stevie Wonder, Ariana Grande, Jennifer Hudson, and Chaka Khan, among others. The guest list included former presidents, civil rights leaders, and everyday fans who had waited hours just to pay their respects. It was as grand as Aretha's life had been, and perhaps just as complex. The event mixed celebration and mourning, joy and reflection. It was, in every sense, a final performance. In the years since her death, Aretha's music has continued to resonate. Her catalogue remains one of the most influential in American history. Songs like Respect, Think, Chain of Fools, and Ain't No Way have found new listeners through films, television, and streaming services. Younger audiences, many of whom were not alive during her peak years, continue to discover her voice, and in doing so, discover her story. Aretha Franklin didn't just sing songs, she told truths. She challenged norms, stood her ground, and never allowed herself to be reduced to a simple label. She was a gospel prodigy, a soul legend, a civil rights advocate, and a fiercely private individual. Her voice could shake rafters, but her silence could say just as much. Even now, long after the music has stopped, Aretha's message still echoes. She taught us that respect isn't just a chorus, it's a demand. And if you weren't ready to give it, she was more than ready to walk away. In the end, Aretha Franklin didn't need to fight for her legacy. She had already built it, one note at a time.